Shattered glass reflected Zora's determined face as the security guard's handcuffs clicked around her wrists. "You've made the biggest mistake of your life," she whispered, her FBI badge concealed beneath her designer coat. His smirk vanished when her phone rang with director calling. Before we dive into this shocking story of justice and prejudice, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit that like button and subscribe to see more stories of powerful women standing up against discrimination. What would you do if someone underestimated you like they did Zora? Let's find out what happened next. Zora Reynolds had never imagined that her career path would lead her to being handcuffed in a luxury mall, but her journey to this moment had been years in the making. As a 31-year-old black woman who had fought her way through the FBI Academy despite facing discrimination at every turn, Zora was no stranger to prejudice. The daughter of civil rights activists who had marched in Selma, Zora had grown up in Harlem with stories of resistance and perseverance. Her childhood bedroom had been decorated with pictures of powerful black women who had changed history, and she had vowed to become one of them someday. Now, as one of the top graduates in her class specializing in undercover operations, she was about to face her most challenging assignment yet. The Boston field office had been tracking a series of sophisticated jewelry thefts across luxury stores in the city, with a disturbing pattern emerging. Black customers were being targeted at an alarming rate. Initial investigations pointed to an inside job with security personnel potentially involved in either the thefts themselves or in covering up for the real culprits by directing suspicion toward innocent black shoppers. When Director Marcus Sullivan called Zora into his office on a chilly Monday morning, she knew something significant was brewing. "Agent Reynolds, I need your particular skill set for this one," Sullivan said, sliding a file folder across his mahogany desk. "Brilliance Jewelers at Copperfield Mall. We have reason to believe their security staff may be involved in a pattern of racial profiling that's connected to these thefts." Zora opened the folder to find photographs of the store, its staff and incident reports detailing confrontations between security and black customers. "Your assignment is to go in undercover as a wealthy buyer. Identify any security personnel showing racial bias patterns and gather evidence we can use to determine if they're connected to the thefts." The preparation phase was intensive. For 3 days, Zora worked with the FBI team to create a convincing wealthy identity. She would become Olivia Thompson, a successful tech entrepreneur with money to spend on luxury items. The technical specialists fitted her with discreet recording devices disguised as jewelry, a diamond pendant necklace with a built-in microphone, earrings with tiny cameras, and a designer watch that could transmit her location and activate an emergency signal if needed. As she prepared mentally for the operation, Zora couldn't help but recall her own experiences with discrimination while shopping in upscale stores. The familiar feeling of being followed by security, the hovering sales, associates the requests to see identification that weren't asked of white customers. Use those experiences, her training officer had told her during preparation. Channel that awareness into your cover. It will make your reactions authentic. The day before the operation, Zora met with her team one last time. The technical specialists checked all her equipment, ensuring everything was functioning properly. Agent Marcus Davidson, her partner who would be monitoring remotely, reviewed the extraction plan if things went wrong. "Are you concerned about potential escalation?" Davidson asked during their final briefing. Zora nodded thoughtfully. "Always. But I'm trained for this. And honestly, this case matters to me personally. Too many people have faced this kind of discrimination without having the power to fight back. I do have that power." When the morning of the operation arrived, Zora dressed carefully in a Chanel suit, Christian Louboutin heels, and a cashmere coat that collectively cost more than 3 months of her actual salary. The FBI had spared no expense in creating a convincing, wealthy persona. She drove a rented Mercedes to Copperfield Mall, rehearsing her cover story one final time as she navigated the Boston traffic. Her heart rate remained steady. Years of training had taught her how to control her anxiety, but she felt a familiar tension in her shoulders as she pulled into the parking space. As she entered the mall, Zora immediately noticed the subtle signs that she was being watched. Despite her expensive attire, A security guard near the entrance spoke quietly into his radio as she passed. As she window shopped at several stores practicing her cover identity, she caught glimpses of mall security adjusting their positions to keep her in view. It was a dance she recognized all too well, and now she was using it to her advantage. Taking a deep breath, she headed toward the gleaming storefront of Brilliance Jewelers, ready to begin her investigation in earnest. The game was about to begin, and Zora was determined to expose the truth no matter how ugly it might be. Brilliance Jewelers exuded luxury from every angle, from the plush champagne-colored carpet to the crystal chandeliers that cast prismatic reflections across the gleaming display cases filled with diamonds, sapphires, and gold. As Zora stepped through the ornate entrance, the reactions of the store staff created an immediate study in contrasts. A young saleswoman named Madison with blonde hair, pulled back in a sleek ponytail, approached Zora with an eager smile. "Welcome to Brilliance. Is there anything specific I can help you find today?" Her enthusiasm seemed genuine, her body language open and welcoming as she gestured toward the display cases. In stark contrast, the store manager Clayton, a middle-aged man with salt and pepper hair and an expensive suit, maintained a suspicious distance. His eyes narrowed slightly as he whispered something to another employee, his gaze never leaving Zora as she began to browse. It was then that Zora first noticed Richard Keller, the 34-year-old white security guard, whose presence would soon become impossible to ignore. Tall and broad-shouldered, with a military-style haircut and ramrod-straight posture that suggested previous military service, Richard positioned himself strategically near the entrance to the store's most expensive .com display section. His eyes tracked Zora's movements with an intensity that went beyond normal security vigilance. Within minutes of her arrival, he had already reported into his radio twice, something he hadn't done when the elderly white couple had entered just before her. As Zora moved through the store, examining various pieces with the practiced eye of someone accustomed to luxury, she noted how Richard followed her path, always standing a few feet closer than necessary. When she paused to admire a display of diamond bracelets, he shifted his position to stand directly behind her, close enough that she could hear his breathing. She noticed his stance was markedly different from his behavior with other customers. With white shoppers, he maintained a respectful distance, often positioned near the door or against a wall. With Zora, he hovered, creating a bubble of tension that was impossible to ignore. "I'd like to see that diamond necklace, please," Zora said to Madison, pointing to a stunning piece priced at $75,000. The hesitation was subtle but unmistakable. Madison's eyes flickered briefly toward Clayton, who gave a barely perceptible nod. "Of course," Madison replied, her voice now tinged with uncertainty. "We'll need to see some ID before showing pieces in this collection." Zora noticed a white woman at another counter being shown items of similar value without any such request. As Madison retrieved the necklace from the case, Richard moved even closer, positioning himself directly beside the counter. His hand rested casually on his belt, inches from his taser, a posture that conveyed silent intimidation. "That's a very expensive piece," he commented unnecessarily, his tone suggesting doubt about her ability to afford it. "It's exactly what I'm looking for," Zora replied smoothly, maintaining her cover as wealthy entrepreneur Olivia Thompson. "I just closed a major tech deal and wanted to treat myself." The microaggressions continued as she examined the necklace. Questions about how she could afford such luxury items. Comments about the surprising depth of her knowledge about diamond quality. Each interaction reinforced the pattern Zora had been sent to investigate. The first direct confrontation came when Zora asked to try on a platinum and diamond bracelet worth $60,000. As Madison prepared to help her, Richard stepped forward, placing himself between Zora and the counter. "Store policy requires a credit check before trying on items of this value," he stated firmly. Zora, while maintaining her cover identity's composure, noted that just 10 minutes earlier, a white customer had tried on a similar piece without any such requirement. "That's interesting," she replied calmly. "The woman over there just tried on something very similar without a credit check." "Perhaps the policy is new." Richard's jaw tightened, but before he could respond, Clayton intervened smoothly, explaining that they could make an exception this one time. Throughout her visit, Zora discreetly observed Richard's behavior with other customers. When another black shopper entered, a well-dressed man in his 40s, Richard immediately repositioned himself to keep both black customers in his line of sight. Using her designer handbag as cover, Zora activated one of her recording devices, capturing video of this pattern of surveillance. After 2 hours of browsing, Zora decided she had gathered enough initial intelligence for her first visit. She thanked Madison for her assistance and explained that she wanted to think about her potential purchase before making a decision. "I'll definitely be back tomorrow," she added, noting how Richard's posture tensed at this information. As she left the store, she was aware of being followed at a distance. Through the reflection in a store window, she saw Richard trailing her through the mall, speaking into his radio. When she reached her car in the parking lot, she noted a mall security vehicle positioned with a clear view of her Mercedes. As she pulled away, she saw Richard standing near the mall entrance, making a note of her license plate number. Back at the temporary FBI base established in a hotel room near the mall, Zora began the process of downloading and reviewing the day's recordings. Phase 1 of her operation was complete, but the real challenges were yet to come. She knew from experience that tomorrow would bring escalation, and she needed to be fully prepared for what that might entail. The evening debriefing with the FBI team revealed more than Zora had initially realized about Richard Keller's concerning behavior patterns. The footage from her concealed camera jewelry showed clear evidence of targeted surveillance. Look at the timestamps Agent Davidson pointed out as they reviewed the video in their hotel base of operations. Keller spent 78% of his shift within 15 feet of your position, while only spending 12% near any other customer. That's not normal security protocol, that's targeted harassment. The technical analysts enhanced audio recordings where Richard had whispered into his radio, revealing comments like "still watching the suspect" and "keeping eyes on the target," language typically reserved for identified threats rather than ordinary customers. While the team analyzed the data, another agent had been conducting background research on Richard Keller. What they discovered painted a disturbing picture. Keller served 6 years in the Army Military Police, honorably discharged, then worked for 3 private security companies before landing at Copperfield Mall, reported Agent Santos, scrolling through her laptop. What's interesting is the pattern of lateral moves. He never stayed at one company longer than 18 months, and we found evidence of at least 7 excessive force complaints during that time, all involving minorities. The most damning evidence came from Richard's barely protected social media accounts, which contained racially charged comments about certain people not belonging in upscale establishments and complaints about having to babysit shoppers who can't afford to buy anything anyway. Have you ever experienced being followed in a store for no reason other than how you look? Comment number 1. If you felt profiled while shopping, and hit the like button if you believe this kind of discrimination needs to be exposed. Subscribe to see more stories of justice being served to those who abuse their positions of power. Would you have the courage to go back into a situation like Zora's, knowing the security guard was targeting you? As the team planned the second day of the operation, they developed a strategy to push boundaries further and test Richard's reactions with more expensive items. "Tomorrow we escalate," Director Sullivan instructed during their video conference. "Zora, we need you to create situations that will force Keller to either back down or reveal his biases more explicitly. We need undeniable evidence." The next morning, Zora prepared for her return to Brilliance Jewelers with even greater attention to detail. She chose a street John knit dress in deep burgundy, paired with Ferragamo heels and a Hermes scarf. Her jewelry was more ostentatious than the previous day. Diamond studs in her ears containing miniature cameras, a tennis bracelet on her wrist with enhanced audio recording capabilities, and a Cartier watch that doubled as a GPS tracker and emergency signal. She arrived at the mall shortly after 11 in the morning, noting the immediate reaction from security personnel who recognized her from the day before. Richard was not at his usual post near the store entrance, but Zora spotted him emerging from the back room moments after she entered, suggesting someone had alerted him to her arrival. His expression hardened when he saw her, a muscle twitching in his jaw, as he took up position near the most expensive display case. This time, Zora's experience took an unexpected turn when an elderly white man approached her with a warm smile. "Welcome back to Brilliance Jewelers," he said, extending his hand. "I'm Arthur Copperfield, the owner. Madison mentioned you were interested in our diamond collection." Arthur's respectful treatment created an immediate tension in Richard's demeanor. The security guard's posture stiffened, his eyes narrowing as he watched the interaction between the store owner and Zora. While examining a pair of sapphire earrings with Arthur, Zora's enhanced audio equipment picked up a conversation between Richard and another security guard who had just arrived for his shift. "Keep an eye on the black woman by the main counter," Richard instructed quietly. "She doesn't belong here. Something's off about her." The second guard, younger and visibly uncomfortable with the instruction, nodded reluctantly and took up position near another entrance. Deciding to push further, Zora asked to see the store's most expensive piece, a stunning diamond necklace worth $250,000 that gleamed in the center display case. "This is our masterpiece," Arthur explained proudly as he carefully removed it from the display. 127 perfectly matched diamonds, total weight of 18 carats. As Arthur described the piece, Richard moved uncomfortably close to Zora, standing directly behind her with his hand resting on his taser. "You know much about diamonds, ma'am?" he asked, his tone condescending. When Zora began to discuss the color grading and clarity with knowledgeable precision, Richard's expression darkened further. "These are flawless diamonds," Zora noted, examining the necklace carefully. "But this center stone appears to have a slight inclusion if you look at it under direct light." Arthur looked surprised, then impressed as he examined the stone more carefully. "You have an exceptional eye," he acknowledged. "Most people wouldn't notice that without magnification." Richard, embarrassed by Zora's expertise contradicting his assumptions, interjected. "We need to be careful with merchandise of this value. Perhaps we should verify the lady's identity before continuing." Arthur waved off the suggestion. "Mrs. Thompson is clearly a connoisseur. There's no need for that." The tension was building toward a confrontation that Zora could feel approaching like an incoming storm. Richard's breathing had become more rapid, his hand never straying far from his weapon as he continued to hover near her. When Arthur was called away to address another matter, leaving Zora with Madison to continue browsing, Richard immediately stepped closer. "People like you don't usually shop for pieces like these," he said, voice low enough that only Zora and her recording devices could hear. "What did you say your occupation was again?" The comment was precisely the type of evidence Zora had been sent to collect, an explicit bias statement that couldn't be explained away as standard security protocol. As she left the store that afternoon, promising to return the following day to make her final decision on a purchase, Zora knew that the operation was reaching a critical point. Richard's behavior was escalating exactly as the FBI team had predicted, creating both the opportunity they needed for evidence gathering and the danger that came with confronting entrenched prejudice. Back at the hotel, the team reviewed the new recordings, with growing concern about the security guards' increasing hostility. "We could pull you out now," Director Sullivan suggested during their video debrief. "We already have enough to prove discriminatory behavior." But Zora shook her head firmly. "We don't have enough to prove the connection to the theft ring yet. And this isn't just about one security guard. It's about exposing a system that enables this kind of discrimination." "I need to go back one more time." What she didn't share with the full team was her personal motivation. The memory of her mother being accused of shoplifting in an upscale department store 20 years earlier, an humiliating incident that had never received justice. This case was about more than evidence gathering. It was about changing a pattern that had persisted for far too long. The mood in the FBI's temporary headquarters was tense, as the team prepared for what they all recognized would be the most dangerous day of the operation. The evidence they had gathered over the past 2 days clearly showed Richard Keller's discriminatory behavior, but the director was concerned about Zora's safety. "His hostility is escalating at a concerning rate," Director Sullivan noted, reviewing the previous day's footage. "If you go back in today, we need additional precautions." Zora stood by the window watching the early morning traffic below as she considered the risks. "I understand the concerns," she said, finally turning to face the team. "But we need conclusive evidence that links the security personnel to the theft pattern. If I back out now, Richard continues his behavior and we lose our chance to expose the larger operation." What the team didn't fully understand was Zora's personal stake in this mission. She hadn't told them about the incident from her childhood when her mother, a respected community college professor, had been publicly accused of shoplifting a scarf she had already paid for. The memory of her mother's humiliation as security guards emptied her purse in front of other shoppers had never faded. No apology had been offered when the receipt was found. No consequences had followed for the security guard who had profiled her. "My mother experienced almost identical treatment decades ago." Zora revealed, her voice quiet but firm. "Nothing has changed because people like Richard never face consequences. Today, that changes." Director Sullivan studied her face for a moment before nodding. "We'll position additional agents throughout the mall. Agent Davidson will be posing as a shopper near the jewelry store. At the first sign of escalation, you activate your emergency signal." The plan was set. Zora would return to Brilliance Jewelers and announce her intention to purchase the $250,000 necklace she had examined the day before. The transaction would require her to present her government-issued credit cards, part of her FBI cover identity, which they anticipated might trigger Richard's suspicions. The team was counting on his prejudice, leading him to assume fraud rather than considering legitimate explanations. Zora dressed with particular care, selecting a tailored Armani pantsuit in deep navy paired with subtle gold jewelry that concealed the most advanced recording equipment available to the FBI. Her hair was pulled back in a sleek chignon, projecting the image of successful wealth that had been carefully crafted for her cover identity. As she drove to the mall, she mentally rehearsed the possible scenarios and her responses to each. She would maintain her cover for as long as possible, gathering the maximum evidence before the inevitable confrontation. The mall was busier than previous days, a Saturday crowd of shoppers creating a background energy that added another unpredictable element to the operation. As Zora walked toward Brilliance Jewelers, she noted the positions of 3 undercover FBI agents strategically placed throughout the main concourse. Agent Davidson gave her a barely perceptible nod from his position at a coffee kiosk across from the jewelry store. Taking a deep breath, Zora entered Brilliance Jewelers for the 3rd time. Madison greeted her with a warm smile, clearly recognizing the potential commission from a major sale. "Mrs. Thompson, we were hoping you'd return today. Have you made a decision about the necklace?" Richard was already moving toward her position, his morning coffee abandoned at his station by the door. His expression was a mixture of suspicion and something darker that Zora recognized from years of encountering prejudice, the look of someone who had already made assumptions based solely on the color of her skin. "Yes, I've decided to purchase the diamond necklace we looked at yesterday," Zora announced loud enough for Arthur Copperfield to hear from his office. The owner emerged beaming at the prospect of such a significant sale. "Wonderful. Let's get everything prepared for you." This is certainly a special occasion. As Arthur instructed Madison to retrieve the necklace from the vault, Richard positioned himself directly beside the main counter, watching every movement with intense scrutiny. The necklace was brought out with ceremony, placed on a black velvet display pad, and positioned under the perfect lighting to showcase its brilliance. Zora examined it one final time, then nodded her approval. "It's perfect. I'll take it." The moment of transaction arrived, the critical point in the operation. As Madison prepared the sales documentation, Zora reached into her designer handbag and removed her wallet. "Will you be paying by check?" Arthur asked, already preparing to accept a wealthy client's payment method. "I'll be using my special corporate account cards," Zora replied, removing several government-issued credit cards that were part of her cover identity. They were legitimate payment methods created by the FBI for undercover operations, indistinguishable from high-end corporate credit cards, except for subtle security features. The reaction was immediate. Richard's posture changed, his hand moving to his belt as he stepped closer to the counter. "Those don't look like regular credit cards," he said, his voice carrying an accusatory edge. "We've had problems with fraud recently." Zora maintained her composure. They're specialized corporate cards. Feel free to call the verification number on the back. Instead of reaching for a phone, Richard's hand shot out, grabbing Zora's wrist with unnecessary force. "I think we need to verify these in our security office," he said, his fingers digging painfully into her skin. What happened next occurred with a suddenness that shocked everyone in the store. Without warning, Richard yanked Zora away from the counter, twisting her arm behind her back in a restraint hold that went far beyond necessary force for a suspected credit card issue. "Richard, what are you doing?" Arthur exclaimed, clearly alarmed by the security guard's actions. "We have a fraud situation," Richard responded already, dragging Zora toward the glass display case. "People like her come in here with fake cards all the time." The prejudice in his statement was unmistakable, captured clearly by Zora's recording devices. As Zora began to protest maintaining her cover identity, Richard's grip tightened. With a violent motion that could not be justified by any security protocol, he slammed her against the nearest glass display case. The impact shattered the reinforced glass, sending shards flying across the counter. A jagged piece sliced across Zora's cheek, drawing blood that immediately began to drip onto her ivory silk blouse. Despite years of FBI training in self-defense, Zora made the split-second decision to maintain her cover rather than fight back. Each moment of Richard's excessive force was being recorded, building an irrefutable case against him. "You're making a mistake," she gasped, as he roughly pulled her arms behind her back. "Those cards are legitimate." Richard's response, captured with perfect clarity by her concealed microphone, would later become central to the case against him. "Yeah, right. Like you could afford anything in this store. I've seen your kind before, thinking you can scam your way into places you don't belong." The racial component of his assault was now explicitly on record. The store erupted into chaos. Customers backed away, some filming the incident on their phones. Madison stood frozen behind the counter, her face pale with shock. Arthur attempted to intervene, insisting that Richard release Zora immediately. "This is completely unnecessary. She's a valued customer." But Richard was beyond reasoning, caught in the grip of his own prejudice and the power it gave him over his target. "I'm preventing a robbery," he insisted, as he handcuffed Zora, the metal cuffs biting into her wrists. "Call mall security and the police. We've got a fraudster trying to make a big score." Blood continued to trickle down Zora's face from the cut on her cheekbone as Richard dragged her through the store toward the exit. Shoppers throughout the mall stopped to stare as she was marched through the public concourse like a criminal, the security guard maintaining a running commentary about catching these people before they can steal. Zora's repeated requests to check her identification properly were ignored. With each step toward the mall security office, Richard was digging himself deeper into a case that would soon destroy his career and expose a system that had enabled his discriminatory behavior for years. The trap had been set, the evidence was being gathered, and the moment of revelation was approaching rapidly. The mall security office was a stark contrast to the luxury of Brilliance Jewelers. A utilitarian space with gray walls, fluorescent lighting, and the faint smell of coffee and fast food that lingered from the staff's lunch breaks. Richard pushed Zora roughly into a metal chair beside a desk, cluttered with security reports and monitoring equipment. The cut on her cheek had stopped bleeding, but dried blood had created a stark line against her dark skin, a visual testimony to the excessive force she had endured. "Sit there and don't move." Richard ordered, his voice carrying the artificial authority of someone who enjoyed the power his position gave him over others. Two other security guards hovered uncertainly in the background, clearly uncomfortable with the situation but unwilling to challenge their colleague. Richard emptied the contents of Zora's designer handbag onto the desk, pawing through her belongings with none of the procedural care that proper security protocol would dictate. "These cards are fake," he declared, without examining them closely. "Good fakes, but still fake. No way someone like you has legitimate access to this kind of credit line." The racial undertone in his statements was unmistakable, recorded clearly by the devices hidden in Zora's jewelry. As Richard continued his unprofessional search, Zora's phone began to ring. The screen illuminated with the caller ID FBI Director Sullivan, part of the planned escalation sequence that had been triggered when Zora's heart rate and location data indicated a confrontation was underway. Richard grabbed for the phone, his eyes widening slightly at the caller identification. For a brief moment, doubt flickered across his face, the first crack in his certainty that he was dealing with a fraudster. "Give me that," he demanded, reaching for the still-ringing phone. "Who's this Director Sullivan, and why are they calling you Zora?" Faced a critical decision point in the operation. She could reveal her identity, now ending the undercover portion of the mission, or she could continue gathering evidence about how far Richard would take his discriminatory behavior. With the phone still ringing, she chose a middle path. "I need to answer that call," she said calmly. "It's important." Richard held the phone just out of her reach. "I bet it Island. Probably your partner in crime, wondering why you haven't called with the goods yet." When he turned away to show the phone to another security guard, Zora discreetly activated the emergency distress signal in her watch. 3 rapid taps on the side button that would alert the FBI team to prepare for immediate intervention. She had gathered sufficient evidence of discrimination and excessive force, but she wanted to document how the mall's management would respond to the situation. Richard declined the call, then placed the phone on the far side of the desk. "Now," he said, pulling a form from a drawer, "you're going to tell me who you really are and how you got those fake credit cards." Before Zora could respond, the door to the security office opened, and a woman in a tailored suit entered. "What's going on here, Richard? I got calls from 3 different stores about a disturbance." The mall director, Catherine Prescott, took in the scene with a professional's assessing gaze. The handcuffed woman with blood on her face, the contents of an expensive handbag scattered across the desk, the security guard's aggressive posture. "We caught a fraudster trying to use fake credit cards to purchase a $250,000 necklace at Brilliance," Richard reported, straightening his posture. "I intervened before she could complete the transaction." Catherine's eyes narrowed as she noticed the cut on Zora's face. "Why is she bleeding? And why wasn't I notified immediately about an incident of this magnitude?" Richard shifted uncomfortably. "It happened during apprehension. She resisted and fell against a display case." It was the first outright lie he had told, directly contradicting the video evidence captured by multiple sources. "I was bringing her here for processing before contacting the police." Catherine approached Zora, her expression concerned. "Ma'am, are you all right? Do you need medical attention?" Before Zora could respond, Richard interjected. "She's fine, just a scratch. We need to focus on the fraud attempt." The mall director's gaze sharpened. "Richard, what specific evidence do you have that the credit cards are fraudulent? Were they declined at the point of sale?" Richard hesitated, realizing he had acted before any actual transaction had been attempted. "I recognize the type," he said finally. "They're not standard issue cards. And she doesn't fit the profile of someone who would have access to that kind of credit limit." Catherine's expression darkened. "What exactly do you mean by doesn't fit the profile?" The question hung in the air, giving Richard the opportunity to either backtrack or reveal more of his prejudice. "Look at her," he said, gesturing dismissively toward Zora. "Designer clothes that are probably knockoffs. Trying to purchase jewelry worth more than most people's homes. My instinct told me something wasn't right." "Your instinct," Catherine repeated flatly. She turned to Zora. "Ma'am, I apologize for this situation. May I ask your name and occupation?" Zora maintained her cover identity, understanding that the more evidence she gathered about the mall's response to the incident, the stronger the eventual case would be. "My name is Olivia Thompson. I'm the founder and CEO of NextGen Solutions, a technology consulting firm. Those cards are corporate accounts with special security features. If you had bothered to call the verification numbers, you would know they're perfectly legitimate." Catherine turned back to Richard. "Did you attempt to verify the cards before detaining this woman?" Richard's jaw tightened defensively. There wasn't time. She was about to complete a fraudulent transaction. "So you physically detained a customer causing injury without verifying your suspicions through standard protocols." Catherine's voice had taken on the careful neutrality of someone realizing they were facing a potential lawsuit. "I was protecting the store," Richard insisted. "People like her always try to act like they belong in places like this. I've seen it 100 times. The statement was another perfect piece of evidence, clearly demonstrating that his actions were motivated by racial prejudice rather than legitimate security concerns. Instead of immediately revealing her identity, Zora made a calculated response that would strengthen the case further. "I'd like to call my lawyer now," she said calmly. "And I want to file a formal complaint about being profiled and assaulted by your security staff." Catherine nodded clearly, trying to de-escalate the situation. "Of course." Richard removed those handcuffs immediately. As Richard reluctantly moved to comply, his radio crackled with an urgent message. "Security team, be advised we have federal agents approaching the main security office. Repeat, federal agents entering the mall." Richard froze the handcuff key halfway to the lock. In that moment, as understanding began to dawn on his face, the operation moved into its final phase. The revelation that would transform a case of individual prejudice into an exposure of systemic discrimination throughout the malls. Security operations. The trap had been sprung, the evidence collected, and the moment of justice was rapidly approaching. The atmosphere in the mall security office shifted dramatically as the door swung open to reveal a team of professionally dressed individuals, their FBI windbreakers, making their identities unmistakable. Leading the group was Agent Marcus Davidson, Zora's partner. His expression a careful mask of professional detachment that did nothing to hide the anger in his eyes when he saw the dried blood on Zora's face. Richard and the mall security team initially misinterpreted the FBI's arrival, a confusion evident in Richard's first words. "Are you here about the fraud attempt? We've apprehended the suspect and we're about to contact local authorities." Agent Davidson scanned the room, noting the scattered contents of Zora's purse, the handcuffs, and the clear evidence of excessive force. "No, Mr. Keller," he replied, his voice carrying the quiet authority of federal law enforcement. "We're here about you." The confusion on Richard's face deepened. "About me, I don't understand. I was just doing my job protecting the store from fraud." Agent Davidson moved to Zora's side, producing a key to remove the handcuffs still partially attached to her wrists. "Allow me to make some introductions," he said, his voice carrying through the now silent office. "This is not Olivia Thompson, CEO of a tech company." He gestured toward Zora with respect that contrasted sharply with Richard's previous treatment. "This is Supervisory Special Agent Zora Reynolds of the FBI Boston Field Office, conducting an authorized undercover operation investigating patterns of racial discrimination and their potential connection to jewelry thefts in this mall." Have you ever witnessed someone's expression when they realize they've made a life-altering mistake? Comment number 1. If you've seen justice catch up to someone who abused their power, and hit the like button if you believe in holding people accountable for discrimination. Subscribe to see more stories of undercover operations that expose hidden prejudice. What would you have done in Zora's position when Richard was handcuffing her? Would you have maintained your cover like she did? The color drained from Richard's face as the implications of this revelation cascaded through his plater mind. "That's impossible," he stammered, looking frantically between Zora and the FBI team. "She was attempting to use suspicious payment methods. I was just doing my job." Zora stood rubbing her wrists, where the handcuffs had left marks. With the cover identity no longer necessary, her posture and demeanor transformed subtly, the highly trained federal agent now visible beneath the disguise of a wealthy shopper. "Was it just doing your job when you referred to me as people like her?" she asked, her voice steady. "Was it standard security protocol to slam me into a glass case without provocation? Was it procedure to ignore my requests to verify my identity properly?" Agent Davidson nodded to another FBI team member who set up a laptop on the security desk. "We have everything, Agent Reynolds. Multiple audio and video feeds, all transmitted in real time to our command center." Turning to Richard and the mall management, he continued, "Mr. Keller, for the past 3 days, Agent Reynolds has been gathering evidence as part of an authorized federal investigation into patterns of racial discrimination and potential connections to theft rings operating in upscale retail establishments. The laptop screen came to life displaying a grid of video feeds from various angles, all capturing Richard's assault on Zora from different perspectives. The high-definition footage clearly showed him grabbing her without provocation and violently pushing her into the glass display case. The audio playback was equally damning. "People like you don't belong here, and I've seen your kind before," echoed through the small office, the racial undertones impossible to dismiss as anything but prejudice. Catherine Prescott, the mall director, had gone from concerned to horrified as the evidence mounted. "Mr. Place. Keller, is this accurate? Did you actually say these things to a customer?" Richard's defense mechanisms kicked in, the instinct to justify his actions overwhelming any sense of remorse. "You don't understand the pressure we're under. We have theft problems, and certain demographics are statistically more likely to." "Stop talking," Richard Catherine interrupted sharply. "You're making it worse." Outside the security office, a commotion was building as news crews began to arrive. Agent Davidson noted this with a raised eyebrow. "Interesting timing. I wonder how they knew to be here." The implication was clear. Someone had tipped off the media about the FBI operation, adding another layer of public scrutiny to the unfolding situation. Arthur Copperfield, the jewelry store owner, pushed his way into the increasingly crowded security office, his face flushed with anger and embarrassment. "Is it true?" he demanded, looking between Zora and the FBI agents. "Was this all an undercover operation? Do you know what this could do to my store's reputation?" Agent Davidson addressed him calmly. "Mr. Nate, Copperfield, your store, became part of this investigation because of a pattern of reported incidents involving discrimination against black customers. The evidence suggests this goes beyond one security guard and points to systemic issues throughout your mall's security operations." As the reality of the situation settled over the room, damage control attempts began immediately. Catherine pulled Agent Davidson aside, speaking in hushed tones about resolving this situation discreetly. Arthur approached Zora directly, his expression shifting from anger to placating concern. "Agent Reynolds I had no idea this kind of behavior was occurring in my store. Perhaps we can discuss some form of settlement to avoid unnecessary publicity." Zora's response was firm and clear. "This isn't about a settlement, Mr. Copperfield. This is about justice for every black shopper who has been followed, harassed, or accused unjustly in your establishment. This is about changing a system that enables prejudice to masquerade as security." The medic who had arrived with the FBI team had finished cleaning and examining the cut on Zora's face. "You'll need stitches," he informed her. "The glass created a clean laceration, but it's deep enough to require medical attention and will likely leave a scar." Zora nodded, understanding that the physical evidence of injury would strengthen the case further. "Document everything," she instructed the professional agent, now fully present. As the situation continued to unfold, Richard's earlier confidence had crumbled entirely. Seated in a corner of the office, he watched with growing horror as his career imploded around him. "I want a lawyer," he finally stated, the standard response of someone recognizing they faced serious legal consequences. "You'll need one," Agent Davidson confirmed. "You're facing potential charges including civil rights violations, assault, false imprisonment, and possibly more as our investigation continues." With the mall security office now transformed into an impromptu FBI field headquarters, the operation entered its next phase. What had begun as an investigation into one security guard's prejudice was expanding into a broader examination of discriminatory practices throughout the mall and potentially beyond. Zora's decision to decline the settlement offers and push for full investigation would set in motion a chain of events that would transform retail security practices and bring long overdue accountability to a system that had protected prejudice for far too long. The fluorescent lights of FBI headquarters cast harsh shadows across the conference room table, where the team had gathered for a comprehensive debrief of the Brilliance Jewelers operation. 24 hours had passed since the dramatic confrontation in the mall security office, and the case was expanding in scope with each new piece of evidence. Director Sullivan stood at the head of the table, reviewing photographs and documents displayed on the large screen behind him. "First, I want to commend Agent Reynolds for her exceptional work under difficult circumstances," he began, nodding toward Zora, whose face now bore 3 neat stitches on her cheekbone. What began as an investigation into one security guard has uncovered what appears to be a pattern of systematic discrimination throughout Copperfield Mall and potentially other retail establishments in the Boston area. The investigation had accelerated rapidly after Richard Keller's arrest. With the mall now aware of the FBI's interest, agents had executed search warrants for security logs, internal communications, and employee records. The picture emerging from these documents revealed a disturbing pattern that went far beyond one prejudiced security guard. Keller's employment history shows he never stayed at one security position longer than 18 months. Agent Santos reported distributing folders containing background information. We've identified 7 formal complaints of excessive force during that time, all involving minority individuals. What's notable is that none of these complaints resulted in disciplinary action. He simply moved to a new company each time allegations became problematic. More troubling were the internal security directives discovered in Copperfield Mall's email system. While carefully worded to avoid explicitly mentioning race, the documents included instructions for security personnel to pay special attention to non-traditional shoppers in high-end stores and to monitor individuals who don't match the established customer profile. The thinly veiled language of discrimination was unmistakable to investigators with experience in civil rights cases. As the FBI investigation proceeded, the story had broken nationally. News vans remained parked outside the mall, with reporters conducting interviews with shoppers about their experiences. Social media had exploded with the hashtag number #ShoppingWhileBlack as thousands of people shared their own stories of being profiled while shopping. The case had clearly struck a nerve, becoming a focal point in the ongoing national discussion of racial discrimination. Richard Keller had been released on bail, emerging from the courthouse to face a barrage of cameras and shouted questions. His attorney had immediately begun constructing a defense strategy centered around claiming that Keller was simply following his training and mall security protocols. "I was doing my job according to the procedures I was taught," he told reporters in a brief statement. This had nothing to do with race and everything to do with suspicious behavior. The mall management had taken a different approach, immediately placing Keller on unpaid leave and issuing a statement about their zero-tolerance policy for discrimination of any kind. This public position, however, was contradicted by the evidence being uncovered in their own internal documents. Most significantly, the FBI investigation had begun to uncover connections to the original jewelry theft case that had initiated the undercover operation. Several witnesses had come forward, after seeing the news coverage, describing similar experiences of being accused of suspicious behavior while shopping at Brilliance Jewelers and other high-end stores in the mall. "The pattern is becoming clear," Director Sullivan explained, pointing to a timeline displayed on the screen. In at least 5 cases over the past 8 months, black shoppers were detained or closely monitored by security while actual thefts were occurring elsewhere in the store or mall. It's as if the racial profiling was serving as a distraction from the real criminal activity. Arthur Copperfield, the jewelry store owner, had initially defended Richard Keller, describing him as a dedicated security professional in his first interview after the incident. His position shifted dramatically, however, when the FBI presented him with evidence suggesting that Keller may have been involved in actual thefts from the store. Inventory discrepancies had been discovered that correlated with Keller's shift schedule, and security camera footage showed him accessing display cases during off hours without proper documentation. "We believe we've uncovered a sophisticated operation," Agent Davidson explained, bringing up a series of photographs showing Richard meeting with known jewelry fence operators. Keller and potentially other security personnel were using racial profiling as a cover to direct suspicion away from their own activities. While the store's attention was focused on innocent black shoppers, the real thefts were happening under their noses. The most damning evidence had come from Keller's personal computer, seized during a search of his apartment. Emails and messages revealed connections to a network of security personnel across multiple stores who were using their positions to facilitate theft and fraud. The racial profiling hadn't merely been a personal prejudice, it had been a tactical distraction to enable their criminal activities. As the investigation continued to expand, Zora found herself becoming the public face of the case. Her injury, visible in every photograph and news appearance, had become a powerful symbol of the physical cost of discrimination. After providing her official statement and completing the required debriefing sessions, she took a day to visit her parents in their Harlem apartment. Her mother wept when she saw the stitches on Zora's face, but there was pride mixed with the tears. "You're doing what I couldn't do back then," she said, referring to her own experience of being falsely accused in a department store decades earlier. "You're making them face what they've been doing to us for generations." The case was becoming more than an investigation into one security guard or even one mall's practices. It was evolving into a watershed moment in addressing retail discrimination nationwide. As Zora returned to Boston to continue working with the prosecution team, she understood that the next phase of the case, the legal battle, would determine whether this moment of attention would translate into lasting change. The United States District Court for the District of Massachusetts imposed an imposing presence with its neoclassical architecture and marble columns, a physical embodiment of the justice system that would now determine the consequences for Richard Keller and potentially reshape retail security practices nationwide. In the 6 weeks since the dramatic confrontation at Copperfield Mall, the case had expanded far beyond its original scope, becoming a focal point in discussions about racial profiling in retail environments. Assistant District Attorney Vanessa Chen had been assigned as lead prosecutor, working closely with the FBI team to build a comprehensive case against Richard Keller and potentially other defendants as the investigation continued to uncover additional participants in the theft ring. "We're pursuing multiple charges," she explained during a strategy meeting in her office overlooking Boston Harbor. "Civil rights violations under Title 18 assault, false imprisonment, and now conspiracy charges related to the theft operation. The evidence is substantial, but we need to be prepared for the defense to attack Agent Reynolds' credibility and the legitimacy of the undercover operation." Zora nodded, touching the small scar on her cheekbone that had become a visible reminder of what had occurred. The wound had healed, but she had declined plastic surgery to remove the mark. In her mind, it served as a permanent testament to the reality of discrimination she had experienced. While the prosecution team prepared their case, Richard Keller was growing increasingly desperate. Released on bail but unemployed and facing mounting legal bills, he had begun reaching out to former military contacts for assistance. FBI surveillance had intercepted concerning communications suggesting he might be attempting to intimidate potential witnesses. He's contacted 3 former Army buddies with security backgrounds, Agent Davidson reported during their morning briefing. They've been observed conducting surveillance on the mall and attempting to approach former co-workers who might testify against Keller. More alarming were the threats received by Madison, the young saleswoman from Brilliance Jewelers, who had agreed to testify about the pattern of racial profiling she had witnessed during her employment. Anonymous phone calls and social media messages had warned her about consequences if she continued to cooperate with investigators. The FBI had arranged protection for key witnesses, adding another layer of complexity to the expanding case. For Zora, preparing to testify meant reliving the trauma of her assault multiple times as she worked with the prosecution team to construct a timeline of events supported by the extensive audio and video evidence. "It's difficult to watch," she admitted during a session with the FBI's staff psychologist, a standard procedure for agents who had experienced trauma during undercover operations. "Not just because it happened to me, but because I know it represents what countless others have experienced without having the power or platform to seek justice." As the case gained national attention, the Black community in Boston had rallied in support. A newly formed advocacy group called Retail Justice Now organized peaceful demonstrations outside Copperfield Mall, compiled testimonials from others who had experienced similar discrimination, and provided support for witnesses coming forward. Their presence at preliminary court hearings created a powerful visual reminder of the case's significance beyond the individual charges against Keller. The defense team had quickly revealed their strategy during initial hearings. Richard had hired prominent defense attorney Jeffrey Whitman, known for representing police officers and security personnel accused of misconduct. Whitman's approach focused on portraying Richard as a scapegoat for wider systemic issues, arguing that he had been following his training and established security protocols rather than acting out of personal prejudice. My client was implementing the very policies that mall management approved and encouraged, Whitman argued during a motions hearing. If anyone should be on trial, it's the corporate entities that established these profiling practices, not the individual security officer who carried them out. The argument gained little traction with Judge Elaine Montgomery, an experienced federal judge with a reputation for thoroughness and fairness. While the court acknowledges that systemic factors may be relevant context, she stated in her ruling they do not negate individual responsibility for actions that violate civil rights laws. The case took an unexpected turn when an anonymous mall employee came forward with emails showing that Richard had received specific instructions from mall management to monitor black shoppers more closely, particularly in high-end stores. The electronic evidence had been carefully preserved despite an apparent attempt by mall management to delete incriminating communications following the incident. "This changes everything," ADA Chen told the FBI team during an emergency meeting. "We now have evidence of explicit discriminatory policies, not just implicit bias." The mall management could face charges as well. As pretrial hearings continued, Judge Montgomery ruled that all FBI evidence, including the undercover recordings, would be admissible at trial. The defense's motions to suppress the recordings on technical grounds were denied, strengthening the prosecution's position significantly. Sensing the weakening of their case, Richard's legal team began floating potential plea agreements, each offering increasingly larger settlements in exchange for reduced charges. Zora remained firm in her position that the case needed to proceed to trial. "This isn't about money or even about punishing one person," she explained to Director Sullivan when he presented the latest settlement offer. "It's about creating a public record of what happened and establishing legal precedent that can be used in future discrimination cases." With plea negotiations, stalled national media coverage intensified as the trial date approached. Major networks sent legal analysts to Boston to cover the proceedings, and the Justice Department's Civil Rights Division had assigned observers to monitor the case for potential broader implications for federal anti-discrimination enforcement. When the trial finally began on a crisp autumn morning, the courtroom was filled to capacity with journalists, legal observers, and community members. ADA Chen's opening statement laid out not just the specific assault against Agent Reynolds, but the broader pattern of discrimination that had enabled and concealed criminal activity. "This case will demonstrate how racial profiling does not make us safer," she told the rapt jury. "Instead, it creates smokescreens behind which real crimes can occur undetected." The most powerful moment of the early proceedings came when the prosecution played the complete, unedited video of Richard's assault on Zora, including his racial comments captured clearly on the FBI's audio equipment. Several jurors visibly recoiled at the violence of the encounter and the explicit bias in Richard's statements. When Richard took the stand in his own defense, the strategy of portraying himself as simply following orders quickly unraveled under Ada Chen's methodical cross-examination. "If you were just following protocols, Mr. Keller," she asked, "can you point to any mall security document that instructs officers to physically slam suspects into glass cases before verifying their identity?" His testimony grew increasingly contradictory as Chen contrasted his claims with his own recorded words. By the time he left the witness stand, even his own attorney appeared concerned about the impression he had made on the jury. As the trial progressed into its second week, the broader implications of the case continued to expand. Retail organizations nationwide had begun reviewing their security protocols, and several major department store chains had announced new anti-discrimination training programs for all security personnel. What had begun as an investigation into one security guard's actions was evolving into a watershed moment for retail equality, exactly the outcome Zora had hoped for when she decided to pursue the case to its conclusion. The jury deliberation room in the federal courthouse hummed with tension as 12 citizens weighed the evidence against Richard Keller. After a 2-week trial that had captured national attention, the fate of the former security guard, and in many ways the future of retail security practices, rested in their hands. Outside, the courthouse supporters from Retail Justice Now maintained their vigilant presence, holding signs bearing photographs of Zora's injured face, alongside the simple message, "Shopping, while black is not a crime." For Zora, the waiting period was perhaps the most difficult part of the entire ordeal. She had maintained her professional composure throughout the trial, delivering clear, factual testimony about her experiences without allowing emotion to overwhelm her presentation. Now, with the case in the jury's hands, the full emotional impact of the past months began to surface. "Whatever happens with the verdict, you've already changed things," Director Sullivan told her as they waited in a nearby coffee shop away from the media cameras that had become a constant presence in her life. Retail security directors across the country are revising their protocols. Training programs are being rewritten. You've started something important. After 27 hours of deliberation, the jury reached their decision. As the courtroom filled for the verdict announcement, Zora sat at the prosecution table, her posture straight and her expression composed despite the churning anxiety she felt inside. When the jury foreman stood to deliver the verdict, a hush fell over the packed gallery. On the count of violating civil rights under color of authority, we find the defendant, Richard Keller, guilty. The foreman continued through the list of charges: assault, false imprisonment, conspiracy to commit theft, evidence tampering, finding Richard guilty on all counts. The former security guard showed little visible reaction as the verdict was read, staring straight ahead with the same expressionless mask he had maintained throughout the trial. The sentencing would come later, but the conviction itself represented a significant victory in the larger battle against discrimination in retail environments. The impact of the case extended far beyond the individual punishment of one security guard. Within weeks of the verdict, the National Retail Federation announced the creation of a comprehensive anti-discrimination training program that would become standard across member organizations. Copperfield Mall, seeking to repair its severely damaged reputation, implemented a complete security overhaul, hiring diversity consultants to restructure their approach and installing new management throughout the organization. For Zora, the case had brought professional recognition as well. The FBI created a new Civil Rights Enforcement Division, focused specifically on addressing discrimination in commercial establishments, with Zora appointed as its first director. The position would allow her to build on the precedent established by the Keller case training agents to identify and address similar patterns of discrimination nationwide. The most unexpected development came 2 weeks after the verdict, when Richard's attorney contacted the prosecution with an unprecedented offer. Facing substantial prison time at his upcoming sentencing, Richard had decided to cooperate with investigators in exchange for sentencing considerations. He claims he can provide evidence about a larger network of security personnel involved in discrimination and theft across multiple malls and retail chains. Agent Davidson explained during an emergency meeting with the prosecution team. According to his attorney, this isn't isolated to Copperfield Mall. It's a pattern that exists throughout high-end retail in multiple states. The information Richard provided led to a series of investigations and arrests that uncovered a sophisticated operation using racial profiling as cover for organized retail theft. The revelation that discrimination wasn't just a product of individual bias, but sometimes a tactical choice to enable other crimes, added another dimension to the national conversation about retail security practices. The case had begun to influence policy beyond the retail sector. Congressional hearings on commercial discrimination practices were scheduled, with Zora invited to testify about her experiences and the broader implications of the investigation. Legislation was being drafted to establish clearer federal guidelines for security practices in public accommodations, with specific provisions addressing racial profiling. 6 months after the verdict, Zora took a personal day to fulfill a promise she had made to herself. She invited her mother to accompany her to the renovated Brilliance Jewelers, now under new management with completely revised security protocols. As they entered the store, they were greeted warmly by staff, who showed no hint of the suspicion or surveillance that had once been standard practice for black customers. "I never thought I'd see this in my lifetime," her mother whispered, as they were shown an elegant display of sapphire earrings, treated with the respect and attention that should have been standard for all customers regardless of race. Before Richard's sentencing hearing, Zora requested a supervised meeting with the man whose actions had caused her physical injury, but had ultimately helped expose a system that had harmed countless others. In a small conference room at the Federal Detention Center, she sat across from Richard, separated by a table, but connected by the events that had transformed both their lives. "I want to know why," she said simply. "Not the excuses you gave in court, but the real reason you targeted me that day." Richard was silent for a long moment, the bravado he had displayed throughout the trial noticeably absent. "It started years ago," he finally said, his voice quiet. "I was passed over for the police academy. The spot went to a black candidate who scored lower on the physical tests but higher on the written exam. I told myself it was reverse discrimination, that I deserved that position." He paused, looking down at his hands. "I built my whole security career on that grievance, looking for ways to prove I was better, smarter than." He trailed off, then looked up to meet her eyes. "Then people who looked like you. It became automatic. I didn't even question it anymore." The honesty of his response wasn't an excuse for his actions, but it provided a window into how prejudice can become embedded in a person's professional identity, shaping decisions and behaviors in ways that eventually seem normal, rather than discriminatory. 1 year after the incident that had left her bleeding in a mall security office, Zora returned to Brilliance Jewelers, not as a customer or undercover agent, but as an invited speaker for the store's staff diversity training. As she shared her experiences and insights with the assembled employees, she noticed a bronze plaque near the entrance that commemorated the case as a turning point in the store's history and commitment to equality. The legacy of what had begun as a routine undercover operation continued to expand. Security training programs nationwide now included specific modules on avoiding discriminatory practices, with Zora's case study as required reading. Mall security officers received enhanced training on proper verification procedures before any detention could occur. Most importantly, more victims of similar discrimination felt empowered to come forward, knowing that their experiences would be taken seriously by authorities. As Zora concluded her presentation to the new generation of retail employees, she emphasized that the transformation wasn't complete. What happened here wasn't just about one security guard, or one store, or one incident, she told them. It was about recognizing that systems of discrimination don't just harm their immediate victims, they corrupt the entire environment, enabling other forms of wrongdoing to flourish in the shadows. True security comes from treating everyone with equal dignity and respect. When she left the store that day, she passed a young black woman being shown an expensive watch by an attentive salesperson, no security guard hovering nearby. It was a small moment, unremarkable in what should be a normal retail experience, but it represented exactly the change she had fought to create. The scar on her cheekbone had faded to a thin line, but the impact of her undercover operation would continue to shape retail equality for years to come. Have you ever witnessed a moment where justice and transformation came together to change a broken system? Comment below about a time you saw real change happen in your community. If this story of courage in the face of discrimination moved, you hit the like button and subscribe to hear more accounts of people who stood up against injustice. Share this video with someone who needs to understand the reality of racial profiling and how we can work together to create a more equitable society. Thank you for joining me for this powerful story. Together we can ensure that justice isn't just a word, but a reality for everyone, regardless of the color of their skin. Zora's story illuminates powerful truths about justice and discrimination in America. It shows that systemic racism often hides in plain sight, disguised as security protocols or standard procedures. When institutions enable discrimination, they create perfect covers for further corruption and criminality. This case demonstrates how racial profiling doesn't make anyone safer. It creates smokescreens that allow real crimes to flourish. The story also reveals the tremendous courage required to expose entrenched discrimination. Zora willingly put herself in harm's way, enduring physical injury and trauma to gather irrefutable evidence that couldn't be dismissed or explained away. One person's determined stand created a ripple effect of accountability and transformation across an entire industry. Perhaps most importantly, the story reminds us that meaningful change requires both individual accountability and systemic reform. Richard faced consequences for his actions, but the case expanded beyond one security guard to address the policies, training, and culture that enabled his behavior. True justice isn't just punishing individual wrongdoing, it's transforming broken systems. When we confront discrimination with courage and persistence, we create opportunities for healing and progress that benefit everyone. The scar on Zora's face faded, but the impact of her courage created lasting change that protected countless others from experiencing similar injustice. Have you or someone you know ever experienced profiling while shopping or in public spaces? Your story matters and deserves to be heard. Comment below about a time you witnessed or experienced discrimination, or share how you stood up against injustice in your community. Did Zora's approach of gathering evidence rather than immediately revealing her identity resonate with you? How would you have handled this situation? If this story of courage in the face of discrimination moved you, please hit that like button to help more people discover this important message. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories of individuals who refuse to accept injustice and work to create meaningful change. Share this video with friends, family members, or colleagues who might benefit from understanding the reality of racial profiling and how we can work together to combat it. Thank you for joining us today. Remember that each of us has the power to challenge discrimination when we see it even in small ways. Together, we can build a world where no one is judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character.